if 47% of jobs are automatable, it means that 53% of jobs are not automatable. You should basically do the things that are hard to automate. Every industry, every activity requires some exploration, some social interaction, and some creativity. So these are the sort of soft skills that are still very valuable. People benefit from knowledge spillover. So where you are, location is going to be more relevant than ever.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Learning of Leaders series. I'm joined as always by Peter Vanham, author of Before I Was a CEO. And today we have the privilege to welcome Dr. Benedikt Frey, Director of Future of Work at Oxford Martin School at Oxford University. Welcome, gentlemen. Peter, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, and it's good to be back with you, of course, with all of you. And I think we are all particularly looking forward to this session today with Carl, Dr. Frey. But I hope I can say Carl. Is that okay for you?
You may indeed.
Excellent. But Carl is a very special academic. He became famous in 2013 for the big audience because a research he had made about the future of work had made the headlines, the cover even of The Economist newspaper in the UK, and went all around the world. And he talked about the future of jobs, the jobs that could be automated in the future. He said up to 47% of jobs had some features that could be automated. We'll be talking to you about that, of course, Carl, and how that initial research has evolved over time, how we should interpret it also, because I think there's some misunderstandings around it. But first, I want to ask you on behalf of everyone, how are you? And perhaps also, where are you? Because I think you teach at Oxford University, or does that mean you are in class right now, or are you at home?
I'm at home, and it's very good to be with you, Peter. It would have been even nicer to meet up and have this conversation in person, obviously. But we're well here in Oxford. I'm at my home. You know, it's a short walk away from work at Oxford Martin School. I haven't actually been to my office since February. So the university closed down in springtime. It's opened up gradually, but since we have the privilege to be able to do our work from home, we do. Our team is dispersed across the world. I have a postdoc in France, one in Italy, in other places as well. And we're managing quite well with the help of digital technology.
Well, that's good to hear. It's certainly good to hear from somebody who has, of course, been pontificating and researching about the future of work. Is this the future of work that we should have expected a couple of years ago, namely that everybody can work from home indefinitely?
Well, for some of us, I mean, for me, I don't know how it is for you, Peter, but I was working quite a bit from home even before the pandemic. So I'm probably one of the people for which the new world of work is quite familiar. Obviously, I've been in self-isolation now for a week or so, and that's definitely been different to experiences of the past. And not having the conferences, the meetings, the interaction is something I dearly miss. And I think most people miss that. I think if you look at the data right now before the pandemic, around 5% of people are reported working from home at some given point during the week in Europe and the United States. Now it's over 40%. And I think most people, when you survey CEOs or people and workers more in general, they expect that the future of work is going to be 2 to 3 days remotely, 2 to 3 days at the office. Now, it must be said that that concerns mostly professional service type of jobs that can be done remotely in the first place, and not all jobs can be done remotely. So I think that is something that is important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and you bring up an important point there, which is to say, there's some jobs you can do from home. There's some jobs you cannot do from home. And I want to make a bridge now before we dive deep into your career and all your research, just to the headline research you made a couple of years ago, which talked about the jobs that could be automated. Automated, I think, largely because of the advance of computer technology and artificial intelligence. Is there a parallel between the number of jobs that can be automated and the number of jobs that can be done from home?
Well, to some extent. So, I mean, if you see it sort of through the lens of a project or product life cycle, so for me as an academic, when I do a new research project, I'm mostly out in the beginning at conferences and meetings, trying to debate and discuss different ideas with people to get input. And most inventors, most people that do creative work interact a lot as well. But at some point, we settle on what we want to do, and then it's no longer about exploration, it's more about exploitation and execution. And when something becomes more standardized and routinized, it also becomes offshoreable and automatable. So a lot of the things that we actually can do remotely are things that may eventually be offshored. And when it's offshored and digitized, algorithms can gradually learn from those digital interactions to be able to replicate the work that we do. So there is a parallel in the sense that what is possible to do remotely is gradually likely to become more automatable as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that, of course, I'm not sure if that is a very positive message to begin with, given that we're all from home, whether studying or working right now. And then the doom scenario is, of course, that as the pandemic recedes, rather than being able to return to work, our jobs would disappear and would be automated. I'm sure that that's not the future that you had hoped for or even see in the future. There's been a lot of misconception, hasn't there, about the research that you've done. The original headline that you made was about 47% of jobs. That's an awful lot of jobs, millions, maybe billions of jobs that had, I believe, the potential to be automated. Do I say that correctly? And could you tell us a little bit more about that and how that research has evolved since you originally made that prediction in 2013?
Sure. Let me just touch first of your previous points. It's not all doom and gloom. Exploration is more fun than execution, right? You can, spend more of your time exploring and having the help of computer systems during the execution. That is not, in general, a bad trade. So the good thing is that it's mostly the boring bits of your job that is automatable, and I think that's important.
If I can interrupt you very briefly, I mean, because you go over this very quickly, but these are two key terms for you, aren't they? The term of exploration and the term of execution. And exploration is creative work, is intellectual work. That's the kind of work that you cannot automate. And execution is what you call the boring work. That's something that everybody could do. It's typing in fixed codes or whatever, and that is automatable. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, all execution work is not automatable with current technology today, but it's on balance more automatable. So the exploration part is sort of the part that is about developing new ideas and artifacts, whether it's a new paper, whether it's a painting, whether it's a new product, whether it's a new service. You have to gather ideas and impressions in order to arrive at something new, and that's the exploration part. The execution part is about the production or the execution of that work, whether it's writing a paper that cannot be automated yet, you can automate short news stories, or whether it's producing the prototype that you developed, and that can increasingly be automated with the use of advanced robotics in factories. Not in all, for all types of goods, we should say. So advanced robotics today is mainly used in electrical machinery, automobiles, chemicals, and so on. It's really used for textile these days, which is much more flexible, and not least because they also tend to have a lot of fluctuations in demand. It doesn't pay for business to automate at peak demand level when you have most of the year lower levels of demand. So that's something to keep in mind too.
Now, of course, for most of the students, and then we'll go back into time, but for most of the students, they are going to their first jobs in a little while. They, of course, have not been, at least professionally active in either of the two types of jobs. So I understand the headline finding is, if you want to make sure that you do a job that you can continue to do in the future, you have to learn how to do exploration. You have to learn how to be creative. You have to learn how to do that kind of work.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, in our paper that you mentioned earlier, we identified 3 key bottlenecks to automation. So those are things that machines still do quite poorly. So one has to do with complex social interactions. So if you think about the state of text communication, right? You have these Turing test competitions where human judges try to convince or where chatbots try to convince human judges of them being a person. And some people in the field argue that there was a breakthrough 4 years ago when one chatbot managed to convince 30% of human judges of it being a person. But it did so by pretending to be a 13-year-old Russian orphan boy speaking
Right.
English as his second language with no understanding of English culture. And if you think about, all the subtleties that human communication involve, and this is basically just, text communication. So, reading facial expressions, yes, machines are getting better at that. But if you want to be convinced by somebody, for example, and if you negotiate a deal, or where if you try to motivate members of your team, those are social skills that are nowhere near being automatable today.
Yeah.
The same goes for creativity, and the reason is simply we struggle to define what creativity is. A lot of people tend to conflate creativity with novelty, but creativity is not just about developing something new, it's about developing something new that makes sense to most people. And to have an understanding of what makes sense to most people, you have a comparative advantage of being human. The
Yeah.
third bottleneck relates to sort of perception and manipulation tasks. So navigating unstructured environments is something that robots are still not very good at. So for example, automating factories, factory work, or to some extent warehouses, although that's proven to be harder so far, and the benefit you have there is that you can structure the environment so that robots can navigate it. If you think about your home, you're not going to restructure your entire home and take out all of the objects you have in there just so you can have an automated cleaner. And so we're very far off from having sort of a general purpose robot that can identify and distinguish between all these objects in your home, and yet pick them up and manipulate them.
Yeah.
So that is the third bottleneck to automation, and those are sort of the three key skills that are still very hard to automate.
So we should talk a little bit more about that as we go on in this conversation. I do want to know, Carl, before we get to the more detailed findings that you have. I mean, you, of course, you're now director at the Oxford Martin School in Oxford University. You have made a lot of research. You've written a couple of books. It sounds all very impressive, of course. That's not what you were your whole life. You come from Sweden, I believe, from southern Sweden. Where does a boy from southern Sweden get this fascination for AI and everything that has to do with technology?
That's a good question, Peter. I think it's something that's slowly developed over many years. I can recall one moment where I was in school, I think probably 14 or 15, something like that. My father came home from a business trip and gave me two books, which he labeled as essential reading. And those books were Eoin McCurry's The Lever of Riches and Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma. And I think what both of those books showed me at the time is that the prosperity and well-being we have now is nothing we can that should be taken for granted. It's something that have accumulated only very recently in history, and primarily due to technological change. And what it also showed me is that the transition hasn't been smooth. So it's been a lot of bumps along the way. And for that reason, political economy of technological change is relevant, because people that lose out to the process of creative destruction might resist the introduction of new technologies. And I think that sort of left me with this sense that there's nothing inevitable about it. If the Industrial Revolution was inevitable, it would probably have happened a bit earlier in the history of mankind. If the adoption of new technologies was inevitable, then every country would have adopted the same technologies to the same extent, and every place on the planet would be rich.
Right.
So clearly, that is not the case. But that was probably the starting point for my interest in these topics. I then went on to study economics, which may sound boring, and it probably is to some extent, but I did a little bit of history on the side as well, and that was really sort of the combination of the two that opened up my interest from economic history, so understanding what's actually happened, plus sort of the theory of how things should be working, at least theoretically, was something that allowed me to bring the two together. I had a very inspiring professor who was one of the early people that sort of realized that most of the value in the things we do is not in the sort of bricks and mortar stuff. It's in the patents, it's in the brand, it's sort of intangible assets that are becoming sort of increasing share of our investments and our economies. And understanding and measuring those is going to be absolutely critical to understand what the processes are that drive growth in the future.
Yeah.
So
that's where it started. I mean, when I was 14, Carl, I was playing Nintendo. When you were 14, you were reading about creative destruction. That's quite a different level, but nonetheless.
I spent more time playing a Nintendo, I can assure.
Well, but anyway, so you do this track, you get to economics at university, you get a good professor that teaches you about intellectual property, IP, and you say this is something that's becoming more and more important in the valuation of companies, right? This is important because, of course, the model, let's say, until a couple of decades ago was, most of the value of companies is in the tangible assets. It's in the production plans that they have. It's in all kinds of machinery that they have, and so on and so forth. Right now, intangible assets are more and more important. Now, that's an interesting field of research, but obviously you're still in Sweden, or you moved perhaps shortly afterwards, I think, to Germany. Top places perhaps in their field, but of course not Oxford University. How did you move from, let's say, the Germanic world or the Scandinavian world to the Anglo-Saxon world, to Oxford University?
So I should say, as my name probably reveals, I'm half Swedish, half German as well. And I was born and I grew up in Sweden, but I always spent summers and holidays in Germany. So going to Germany was just natural for me for personal reasons. I wanted to rediscover my roots there as well, if you like. Plus, Munich at the time, and still, is the intellectual property city of Europe. So the European Patent Office is based there. The Max Planck Institute for Competition and Innovation is based there. And that is where I got a scholarship to actually pursue research on that topic. So there were a number of things.
For those students that are from Munich, we have quite a few of them today with us from the EU Business School Munich campus that they know. If you're interested in patents and in intellectual property, you're probably in the right city.
There are other good reasons to be in Munich too. It's a great place.
But so you were there, you were pursuing research, and then you get an opportunity, I believe, to go to Oxford as sort of you could call it like almost an exchange student, an exchange researcher almost, to spend a semester or a year there. Is that where the magic happens once you are in that city and you get to meet people? How does it work at Oxford?
Well, I had almost finished my thesis, and I got lucky in getting a scholarship to spend a year in Oxford. And I made the most of it, which is to say that I didn't work a lot on my thesis, and I went to a lot of presentations and talks. So, I mean, the devious thing about Oxford is that you can, easily, fill a day with just presentations and meetings and drinks and all sorts of exciting things. And that was for me the exploration part, if you like. So that is what made me, first of all, realize that if you want to understand what is happening with technology and society, it's very much an interdisciplinary issue, right? So
meet people from other schools, from other areas.
Absolutely. So the college system, first of all, brings people together across disciplines, but then the Oxford Martin School in particular, so Oxford has set up this sort of research think tank inside the university that funds projects to bring people together across disciplines, which was very exciting to me. Nothing like that existed, at least when I was a student in Sweden, and to my knowledge, not to the same extent in Munich either. So I was fortunate enough to be brought together with Michael Osborne, who's my collaborator on the paper we discussed earlier. And that was sort of the beginning of a very fruitful collaboration.
Very fruitful indeed. I mean, it's a very special paper. Tell us about it. So this paper was about the future of jobs. It was about the kind of jobs that could be automated by AI, but it was also, in a way, I understand, a product of AI, the paper itself, I mean.
Yeah, that's right. And that's another coincidence, actually. So I was lucky in the way, or I was smart enough to understand that I didn't know a lot about artificial intelligence when I arrived. So I tried to find people that actually knew something about it. And those are naturally the computer science and engineering science department. And Mike was one of the people who was interested really in this from the very beginning, in trying also to understand the economic and social impacts artificial intelligence is likely to have. And I came up with this idea that I read this paper by Alan Blinder asking the question, how offshoreable are jobs? And he was sort of classifying different jobs on the basis of a database that provide sort of detailed task descriptions. And Mike told me, well, we can do this much better algorithmically using machine learning. So we ended up using machine learning to answer the question of how many jobs that are likely to be displaced by machine learning, which is perhaps somewhat.
But is it also a good example then, Carl, of how AI doesn't necessarily replace jobs, namely academic jobs in this case, but it sort of just makes sure that you two became sort of super researchers in a way?
Well, it's definitely didn't replace the exploration. So we had to come up with a question to be answered. It helped us answer it in a more efficient way. And so it automated part of the execution process. Didn't automate it fully though, so unfortunately I still had to write the paper, which took some time as well. But it's definitely, I mean, it shows the symbiotic relationship between sort of exploration, execution, and how artificial intelligence can be used to A, improve quality, and B, increase productivity.
So give maybe just, if I understand this correctly, it's almost like a 2x2 matrix between jobs that are more or less based on exploration and more or less based on execution, or how is the classification? And could you maybe give an archetypal example of each of the classifications, the top line, let's say?
So the exploration execution distinction was nothing we used back in that paper. So I think that is sort of helpful for understanding, what is going to be done remotely in the future, as a result of this pandemic as well. But it has sort of an overlap to what can be automated and not. So in terms of understanding, how automatable jobs are, we use the framework I described earlier with its key bottlenecks to automation, being creativity, complex social interactions, and perception and manipulation of irregular objects. And we had a database that provided very detailed descriptions from surveys of people actually performing the tasks in their respective occupations. So we tried to estimate how intensive jobs are in tasks that correspond to these engineering bottlenecks to automation. And that is basically how we proceeded. As you mentioned earlier, one of the key findings was that roughly 47% of jobs are potentially automatable from a technological capabilities point of view. So that is sort of, gives you some indication of what's feasible technologically. Obviously, there are a lot of other factors driving decisions to automate this, well.
Give maybe, 2 or 3 examples of jobs that, either we didn't think could be automated or that we didn't think would not be automated.
So the one that surprised me the most was that we found that fashion models are exposed to automation. And my friend Ken Cook here at The Economist, he used to tease us for that. They thought it was the most silly finding ever, and I probably actually thought we were wrong as well, to be completely honest with you. A year or so ago, Mike sent me a picture of some fashion models and telling me that these models actually don't exist. They've been produced by what's called generative adversarial networks through thousands of pictures, and they're already being used by companies like Dior. So clearly, you can engineer fashion models using, artificial intelligence. That was something I didn't think was possible at the time. The algorithm turned out to be right on that one.
And that's
Another
because
one,
they don't need social skills, they don't need creativity, and they don't need to manipulate things.
yeah, so that's exactly what it's based on, right? And it's self-reported evidence. So clearly, there's some within occupational variation here, right? So, that you can replace a fashion model doing a photo shooting. So that's sort of the easy bit. We don't have robots that are going to replace them on the catwalk or anything like that yet, but it's based on this assessment of self-reported relevance of creativity, complex social interactions, and so on. Yes.
Yeah, and so you've made that research. It made headlines really all over the world. It was really quoted almost everywhere in all media, and it got you, I think, a permanent position almost, or semi-permanent position, at least some job security for a couple of years at Oxford. That was good for you. But you, of course, are driven by your own interests and fascination. And your next question was more something like, and you touched upon it earlier, well, okay, now we understand what jobs could potentially be automated, but it's not because they can be automated that they will be automated, because there's also a social and a political reality that makes it that certain societies will either automate or not automate. And you found some examples for that in history. You touched upon it a little bit earlier. Could you tell us a little bit more about that new research you did? You wrote a book about it, The Technology Trap.
Sure. So in the paper that we published back in 2013, there's a historical section as well, but nobody really paid any attention to it. And I actually thought that was one of the most relevant parts of that paper. So in that, we discuss, the factors that drive decisions to automate rather than just, the potential scope of automation. And what occurred to me as the paper come out is that the debate, most discussions today are highly polarized. The automation debate is no exception. So on the one hand, you have a lot of people thinking that this time is entirely different, and 7% of jobs are going to be automated overnight, and half of the population is going to be unemployed. And on the other hand, you have the economists saying that we've been through mechanization for 200 years. We're still basically at full employment. Labor force participation, if anything, has gone up over time. So why should we worry about this? And the question the book tries to answer is basically, should we feel reassured if the future mirrors the past? And the answer is, well, it depends on which episode of the past. So, well, there can be many different futures, but there are also not just, well, there is just one past, but there are many different episodes in that past.
Right. And so one of the things that you found, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is you said, let's look at the Industrial Revolution, which is a previous moment in history where a lot of jobs were upended, a lot of technology, new technology was introduced. And of course, I remember, and a lot of us remember, that this was sort of the finest hour of Great Britain on the world economy stage. They were first, and I thought, well, that must mean they have the best scientists, the smartest people that make inventions, and because of that, they were able to set up all kinds of new innovations and implement them. But that's not 100% what happened, is it? Did it? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, certainly. So, I mean, the book covers, technological change from pre-industrial times up until today. And the first industrial revolution is the period which I think is most relevant to look at, because many of the economic trends we're seeing today are very similar too. So a similar hollowing out of middle-income jobs. We saw a falling share of income going to labor overall, and we saw economic polarization also translating into political polarization. So those parallels, I think, are quite pervasive.
Ranking, yeah.
But as you mentioned, it wasn't just so. Clearly, the thrift of entrepreneurs did matter enormously. So Richard Arkwright, Samuel Crompton, James Watt, all of these things mattered. But science wasn't really at the heart of technological development during the early stages. So steam power was the only invention that had a sort of science foundation, and steam power didn't really have an impact on the economy before sort of the second part of
the 19th century.
Exactly. So the early inventions of the first industrial revolution were really simple and could have easily been made a couple of 100 years beforehand. And the key question is, why were they not? And One answer to that is that many of these technologies were fiercely resisted, especially among craft guilds who feared new technologies that threatened their jobs, incomes, and skills. And the guilds were actually very politically powerful all across Europe. And Sheila Ogilvy has written an excellent book on the crafts guilds in Europe as well, making this point that they were essentially sort of the enemies of innovation for much of European history, and not just in Europe, and even in China as well, where they persisted much longer, and as a consequence, the Chinese Industrial Revolution was delayed by 200
Didn't
years.
happen. So these people, they resisted change. Now, I mean, I can understand why. I mean, like if your job is about to be automated, you're about to lose your income. I mean, we're seeing this play out today, of course, as well. I mean, like if there is no organized resistance against that, well, the result seems to be widespread poverty and people being unemployed. So what is the lesson from history here? Should we go on and innovate and automate all jobs that we can? Or is there another lesson that we can draw from what happened before?
Yeah, so I think one of the key lessons, if you take this very long run view of history, you know, there's a case to be made to ridicule people like the Luddites because we're so much better off today than we were back in 1800. But if you take it, you know, their own perspective, which was that their jobs were being replaced, that they didn't have very good outside options at the time, and that wages in Britain were stagnant or even falling during the first 7 decades of the Industrial Revolution, well, their resistance made sense. I think from that point of view, you know, we have to think about also, you know, not just the long run benefits, but also the short run adverse consequences. Because if people fear the introduction of new technologies, then they are likely to resist it.
Right.
And if
I see, Carl, that you're a good trained economist still, because you have combined the two insights. On the one hand, which is in the long run, we're all dead. What matters is the short run. And on the other hand, well, the two-handed economist, right? That looks at both sides. So, but Carl, so help us understand today. So we're seeing this new wave of all kinds of innovations. We're seeing the same things play out as happened perhaps 200 or 250 years ago in terms of resistance against it. Tell us first, if technology gets its way, then where do you think the students that are now starting their careers, what should they focus on? Which cities should they go to? Which countries should they go to? What industry should they work in?
So I'm an academic, not a career advisor, but I do my best to provide a little bit of advice. I've been lucky in my career, so you know, they shouldn't take it from my own experience, but I have done some research on how the labor market is evolving, so maybe that is going to be of some help. So first of all, I'm of the old-fashioned view that you should try to figure out what you're good at, what you like, and what you enjoy to doing. So in my career, I was fortunate to, you know, do something which I really enjoyed. I wasn't an excellent student back at school because I didn't enjoy it. So finding your passion is as important today as it has ever been. But I think we pointed to in some directions earlier as well. You should basically do the things that are hard to automate, and those are things that, you know, most people enjoy: social interactions, creativity, and that does not just mean that, you know, you should go into the arts. Even economists can be creative from time to time, believe it or not. So, you know,
help of some AI, I should say.
Sorry.
With the help of some AI, you were creative.
With the help of some AI, exactly, and some non-economists at the engineering science department as well. Right. But broadly speaking, you know, these are things that apply to a lot of jobs. Nearly every industry, every activity requires some exploration, some social interaction, and some creativity. So these are the sort of soft skills that are still very valuable, and we need to think about that in the way we teach, right? I don't mean that we should teach a course on creativity, but we should maybe sort of teach people in smaller groups where, you know, you interact, you debate, you write essays, that sort of stuff, rather than having these, you know, lectures with, you know, one professor standing in the front and 3 other students listening patiently. Secondly, I mean, if we look at the students here at Oxford, if you've done machine learning, well, most people don't even finish their PhDs because they get great job offers. So clearly, that is a booming field. I think if you do statistics in general, most industries are becoming more data-driven. So stats is something you will have a use of, regardless what you do. And if you don't have a use for it in your professional career, well, you can use it to identify fake news, which is becoming more prominent as well.
Well, okay, so you're forcing us to go back to our math and statistics books. We'll give it a shot. On to something else, which is, of course, now very relevant, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, which is where should you work? A lot of our students were based and are based in the campuses, Munich, Barcelona, Geneva, and so on and so forth. You yourself are in Oxford. Then we're hearing a lot of people, including in Silicon Valley, say, well, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can work from anywhere. What should these students that are about to go into their professional lives and that come from all over the world and could go anywhere, where would you advise them to go? What are the hot spots for jobs in the future?
Well, right now it certainly feels that you can work from everywhere if you have a decent internet connection. But I think when this pandemic subsides and we have some good news on the vaccine now, people are going to want to get back to the offices, and not just want to get back to the offices. I think it's going to be very critical for innovation. So you can work very productively from home. You're undisturbed. You can execute, but you're not likely to be very innovative. And something that we've been seeing over the past 30 years, if you look at co-applicants on patents, yes, the geographic distance between them has been going up. But when important conferences get cancelled, innovation suffers as a consequence, because those collaborators need to have encountered each other at some point in order to set up this collaboration. And there's a reason why knowledge industries have always clustered, from Renaissance Florence to Victorian Birmingham and Britain, 20th century Detroit, Silicon Valley, Seattle today, which is that people benefit from knowledge spillovers. These sporadic interactions do really matter a lot, and they're going to still matter in the future, because there is no digital tool that facilitates.
So people should stay in cities, should stay in creative hotspots where they meet interesting people. That's important if you want to make an interesting career and you want to do valuable work.
Absolutely. I totally believe that. I mean, one of the key things in academia is how good is that the faculty that's around you? I mean, that's going to have a huge impact on your ability to do new, interesting work. How good are the people you work with? What sort of people will you encounter? I mean, if you go to and have a conversation, if you have dinner with somebody in Silicon Valley, the person that you have encountered will have met, probably 10 other people during the day, and they were going to filter down some of the best ideas from some of the smartest person to you during that conversation. So where you are, location is going to be more relevant than ever.
Well, I take away that we're not going to get you out of Oxford anytime soon.
I'm likely to stick around for a while.
Thank you, Carl, for this very insightful conversation with us. We're going to continue to talk for the next 20 minutes, but I do want to bring in some questions from students. And if that's okay with you, I'd like to start with actually a countryman of mine, Philip Klaja. He's, as I said, from Belgium, doing a master in management in Barcelona. And Philip, I think you have a question about ethics.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you, Mr. Vanham, for the introduction. And thank you, Dr. Frey, for your time and sharing your expertise. Now, you argue in your paper that one of the competitive advantage of computerization is the lack of human bias. And given that societal changes nowadays often come from disruption, while AI focuses more on the logical pathway, in your opinion, is human irrationality always negative?
Wow, that's a very good question. So first of all, I don't mean to suggest that algorithms are never biased. So there are different approaches to machine learning. There's symbolic AI, which is more sort of pre-programmed, if you like, and then there's sort of things like deep learning, which reflects large data sets, and those data sets are often data sets based on human interaction. So those algorithms are likely to reinforce the biases that already exist in society often. So it's not that the algorithms are free from bias. I mean, human biases can matter in a lot of tasks, and take, for example, complex social interactions, right? I mean, one way of bonding with each other, I'm not sure if there's a straightforward cooking recipe for how best to do that. And your biases and my biases may have something in common, and they may help us, bond and get things done.
Very well. So that's I think a question or an answer that makes us wonder even more. Philip, do you have a follow-up question, or does that sort of satisfy you for the moment?
I do have a follow-up question. It's more in terms of job attractiveness, I think. So to what extent do you think that computerization affects one job performance or a job quality? And how do you see it affecting the job attractiveness in the short term or long run?
I think it's very much, I don't think that there's sort of one impact on all jobs. So I think in my own case, for example, I can do statistical analysis a lot easier than I otherwise could. I can't imagine the generation for me doing everything by hand. So it's suddenly increased the attractiveness of my job. I think if you're, for example, a secretary, it's replaced a lot of the sort of tasks that you used to do in your job, and it's probably made it more boring. So I think it depends very much on whether you're a sort of relatively routine job, or whether you're in a job that sort of which involves more creativity, for example.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Carl. And then I want to turn to Marine, I should say, Manissier. She's actually French, but if I understand correctly, Marine, you are right now in the beautiful island of Sicily. You're doing an executive bachelor at EU. There's no campus in Sicily, so you must be one of those people who are testing whether you can study and work remotely.
Exactly. So I'm the online courses, so I have the chance to move a bit. So I take the chance to make the London in Sicily, so which is nice. Voila.
Does it work? Is it okay for you?
Yeah, it's everything perfect like that for me. It's a good way to learn, and I think is also a good method to be ready for the next professional world, I think.
Excellent. Well, we want to hear your question, of course.
Yeah, so thank you for your contribution, and I wanted to know, since intelligence artificial is very tremendous revolution, however, it can misuse for me. So how can we prevent this?
Thank you. So how can we prevent this, let's say, current wave of technology and innovation from being misused, Carl?
That's an easy question, right? So, I mean, first of all, I think there are certain things that are not going to be preventable, and I think we need to be honest about that. So during the first industrial revolution, for example, nobody knew that burning a lot of coal would heat up the planet, and that it's going to have a lot of adverse consequences. And there are many things about artificial intelligence we are unfortunately just going to learn through trial and error, and we will suffer some of those consequences. How can we mitigate it? Well, first of all, when it comes to deep learning and biases we mentioned earlier, we need data sets that are representative of the full population, where minorities, for example, are not excluded. So I think we can have ethics committees that looks at the data sets that are being used to learn from, for example. But I think there are many other applications, and we haven't gone into things like the use of artificial intelligence in warfare. It's not something that I'm an expert on, to be completely honest with you. So all I can say there is that future wars are not going to be fought like the wars of the past, and we need to think about what that means as well. So we really need people from a range of different backgrounds to come together to tackle these issues, and that's essentially what the Martin School is all about. It's trying to bring together people from different disciplines to think through the key applications of these technologies.
Excellent. That was a nice pitch there for the Oxford Martin School, Carl. Thanks for that. If you have any job openings, let us know that at least we can apply. I think there's a follow-up question, if I'm not mistaken, from Nirman. Nirman, who is originally from India, but if I'm not mistaken, he's now in Geneva, where I am too, doing a Bachelor of Finance, or a Bachelor of Science in Finance, rather. And Nirman, you have a follow-up question, I believe.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Mr. Vanham. Thank you, Dr. Frey. It's an amazing talk. My question is, all things considered, do you see AI in the corporate workforce environment to be a tool to complement human ingenuity and creativity? Or do you rather see it as an instrument that will lead to mass obsolescence, and one which employees and managers should fear and start preparing for?
So over the next decade or two, I don't envision anything like general artificial intelligence emerging that is going to make, humans redundant across all sorts of occupations. So, in our work, for example, if 47% of jobs are automatable, it means that 53% of jobs are not automatable. And if history is any guide, there's no sort of saturation point for our demands and wishes. Nobody 100 years ago would have envisioned that we will have abundant employment opportunities for yoga instructors, or travel agents and all sorts of these leisure activities. So even if we see more leisure, we have jobs that complement those. With regard to sort of general artificial intelligence, nobody really knows, and nobody knows exactly what the path to general artificial intelligence would be either. So it's entirely speculative. I'm not going to exclude the possibility, because if you think that people are just a sort of composition of atoms and there's nothing particularly special about us, then you should be able to engineer human level intelligence. But we don't know the path there. We don't know if it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but it's definitely not around the corner. So I wouldn't advise anybody to plan around a scenario that seems so far-fetched at the moment.
Very well, Carl. I hear some echoes of some Churchillian views in you, that we only have to fear itself, that the doom scenario will not happen on its own. Carl, we did get a question also on the chat. I'm going to interpret it a little bit freely, talking about the impact of technology on things like democracy. With your historical lens, you've seen, of course, that there was this first industrial revolution, brought us a lot of prosperity, better jobs, better situation overall in the long term. But in the short term, of course, a lot of social disruption, revolution, even at a scale that many of us have not known in our lifetimes. What defines whether we're going to see a repeat of that? In today's world, because the technological innovations, I believe, are quite disruptive again.
Well, something you do see from the first industrial revolution is that there was a lot of unrest, there were a lot of machinery riots, but there were a lot of differences across space. So in Britain, where the poor laws were more generous, for example, you had less resistance and you had less social unrest. Similarly, today, we shouldn't equate Sweden with the United States. Both are capitalist open economies, but Sweden has a much more generous social safety net than the United States has. If you lose your job in Sweden, you don't lose your health insurance with that. Collective bargaining is much more pervasive. 85% of the population are under collective bargaining coverage. In the United States, it's 11%. And as a result of that, the income distribution is much more compressed as well. And you do see in Sweden, that said, though, that places that have deindustrialized are also much more likely to opt for far-right political parties like the Swedish Democrats. So I wouldn't want to pretend, sorry?
Today,
yeah. So I wouldn't want to pretend that Sweden is completely unaffected by this, but there are enormous differences across space, and those differences are related to policy. So the simple answer is that we need to devise policies to smoothen this transition. And we developed the welfare state over the course of the 20th century, in large part as a response to the Great Depression, which gave rise to a lot of undesirable movements and political forces, and we should have learned from that. So creative destruction is something that is good over the long run, is enormously disruptive in the short run. We need to deal with those short-run consequences.
Yeah, and of course, how to do that, you could call it the trillion-dollar question almost. Today, we are seeing that the countries that seem to be advancing the most on technology, you can tell me or us a little bit more about what you think those countries are, but we hear most often about the fight for AI dominance between the US and China. Now, both of those countries don't have a very high inequality, and therefore you could say are not, let's say, the ideal societies when it comes to making sure that that everyone is well off, even if there is a lot of wealth and prosperity created by these AI and new technologies overall. Is that the price that we have to pay in the short run, or do you see other countries such as perhaps Sweden, I don't know, that are doing it in a better way, meaning they are able to get the benefits of technology, but they continue to have a good social compact with a lot of shared prosperity?
Yeah, I think that's a good and hard question. I mean, clearly there's to some extent a trade-off. So in the short run, dynamism is associated with higher levels of inequality. But I wouldn't say that, Europe has, decided to have low levels of inequality and therefore low levels of dynamism. I don't think that's the case. I think in Europe, the problem has been that you have a continent with 20 plus languages being spoken, different cultures, and different regulatory systems, which means that it's very hard to scale a business, especially for services where language differences and cultural differences matter much more.
Right.
So I think the trouble for Europe has more been that, rather than having a welfare state that kills incentives to innovate. I don't see any evidence of that at all. Arguably, one of the most innovative countries in Europe is Sweden. Spotify, Skype, a lot of companies come from there, and I think the welfare state, if anything, makes people more individualistic because it allows people to pursue their own interests, and I think that's
the problem, Carl. The problem seems to be then rather that for Europe at least that there is no homogeneity in terms of the language spoken. Now you do have that to a large degree in very large countries such as China and also India. Are those the countries that we can expect to sort of lead the next industrial or technological revolution?
So I think, obviously we're talking about a set of very different countries. So I think technological development contains exploration and execution, as I mentioned. And if you have a stateless capitalist system, then you're likely to be very good at exploiting new technologies. And I think that's what China has been very good at. I can't think of any sort of conceptual innovation in AI that has come out of China. If you look at Chinese patents, yes, there is a lot of patenting going on. But if you look at licensing exports, China is still very modest in terms of the licensing income it derives from its intellectual property. So I think basically that China has been very successful in absorbing mostly foreign technology, developing that further, and for the internal domestic market very well. And the huge internal Chinese market allows companies to grow very large, like Alibaba, like Tencent, and all of these companies. But they are not global international players the same way that Microsoft or Amazon or the American companies are. So I think we're often exaggerating China's innovation capabilities. When it comes to India, I think India has a entirely different set of issues. It has some social issues still, with things like a caste system that means that certain types of interactions are less likely to happen in a society. If you think that innovation is driven by random interactions with people going out exploring, that is less likely to happen in a society where there's still some social rigidities that inhibit people from doing that.
Yeah. So you talk about the pros and the cons. Let's get down to decision time, Carl. If I was a student, 20 years old today, about to graduate in a year, and I had to choose, I'm going to build a career in San Francisco, Shenzhen, or Bangalore, what would you say? Which city should I go to?
I think those are all nice and thriving places. I went to Bangalore next year. It's a great place. There's a lot of smart people and entrepreneurship happening there. I think you need to think about the complementarities of your business. I wouldn't, pick one city or another. Obviously, there are, pros and cons with all of them. San Francisco, the cost of real estate is extremely high. So if you want to set up a business there and hire people, you need to be sure that you can pay them, decent wages for that to be affordable. If you go to Bangalore, there's great talent there, and the cost of living are much lower. So that speaks for Bangalore. So I think there are different trade-offs in those. I wouldn't advise for one.
It's a false choice. These are all great choices actually to go to. But I think you did mention if you have to choose between, a former industrialized region in Germany, for example, or Midwest America, and you have to between those cities or a city like Munich in Germany, or a city like I suppose the Bay Area in the US, you would think it's better to be in the new innovation hubs. Is that right?
Yeah, clearly. So, I mean, especially if you're an inventor, you're going to benefit a lot from these spontaneous interactions. And, being around other skilled people helps. So going to an innovation hub definitely helps you in terms of idea development. The trouble with these places, as I just mentioned, is the cost of housing is very high. So I think those are some of these places are actually strangling their own economies by making it hard for people to move there. And I think that's one of the reasons why places like Berlin are gradually catching up. A lot of entrepreneurs in London, for example, can't afford the cost of living there in the early stage of the development phase, so they're moving to places like Berlin instead. But being close to skilled people certainly matters. And
a final question, perhaps from Clara that we got in, Carl. She's interested in change management in companies, in organizational performance. We haven't really talked about that, and she's asking, how do you expect that AI will impact the way we organize ourselves within companies, the organizational structure of a company, and for example, business leadership, management, etc.?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think artificial intelligence is more of a decentralizing technology than a centralizing one. I think there's a tendency of businesses to think that they need to gather, all the data in one place, and they need a central team to manage that data. But I think a lot of innovation is actually happening similar to with electricity on the factory floor. It's happening where the business is going on. So often when you train an algorithm on a training data set and then you take it to the real data, it doesn't work. And that means as often because of the disconnect between the centralized data team and what's happening on the ground. So I think it's more of a decentralizing technology than a centralized.
Right. Very well. Then finally, maybe to close it off, we've got about 2 minutes left. Could you tell us something, what do you think about, what do you see in terms of cities like Barcelona, Munich, Geneva? This is where the students from EU Business School are based. Are there interesting things happening in AI in those cities? Or does it matter in the future, or should they be looking elsewhere for those kinds of developments?
So we're just about to build a new data set to try to assess how, which cities that are ahead in AI in Europe. I don't have all the answers yet. I think some of the places you mentioned, Barcelona, Munich, there seems to be a lot happening in digital. And obviously it's, both places that are great places to live, and not just because of the industry. So, I'm a frequent visitor to both, and I like going to both.
Well, very well. I'm afraid though I'm based in Geneva. I didn't mention Geneva, so I'm already looking for a new job. I'm going to be moving to Barcelona or Munich. That's kidding, because I actually really like it here. And of course, life is not only about AI. There's also other things, for example, international relations, which is happening here. Carl, thank you so much for joining us this hour. It was a tremendous honor to be learning from you, to be hearing from you. I think we all learned an incredible lot, things that we didn't know before. I think we could not have had the same experience if we were talking to an AI bot. We really benefited from having you. So that's a big thank you to you for sharing your wisdom, for your creativity, for everything you do, for all your insights. A big thank you from all of us here at EU. And of course, I hope that you will be able to go back to doing all the creative things, all the exploratory things at Oxford, and hopefully sometime with us in one of our cities. Thank you, Carl, for your time.
Great to be with you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then over to Luc for the closing words.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frey. Thank you very much, Peter, for this 1 hour with all the input, for the advice you gave to our students. Dr. Frey, if you happen to be in Munich or in Barcelona in the close future, you're always welcome to our campuses. I'd like just to defend Geneva as well, because Geneva is a leader on the digital governance. They take pride on the governance of the digitalization processes. So that's a place for Geneva in this aspect as well. Next for us, from Learning from Leaders, is already next week, next Wednesday. We will be continuing on the same topic of future of works, because we will be welcoming the CEO of Adecco, Alain Dehaze. So stay tuned. Looking forward to see you all next week. And thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.